Good morning. This is Joyce Barrett with Heritage Ohio, and we're here to kick off our revitalization quarterly training on fundraising. I'm delighted to have Lori Overmeyer as one of our presenters. She is with Gettle Associates as Executive Vice President, and her presentation will be on the board that would not ask. You will have over on the right-hand side, if you have any questions, type them into the question box during the presentation and we'll read those at the end. Just below that question panel, you'll see there's handouts and there's a copy of Lori's PowerPoint there. And we're ready to get started. And Lori, you want to tell people a little bit more about your experience in fundraising?
Yes, thank you so much, Joyce, and it's really a delight to be with everybody this morning. I am Lori Overmeyer, as Joyce mentioned, and I've been at Gettle Associates as the Executive Vice President for 16 years now, which has flown by. Our firm does fundraising for nonprofit organizations, and we've had the great pleasure to partner with Joyce with some of the work that we've done with the Glenn College, as well as participate in past back in the good old days when we gathered for conferences and some other webinars as well. Prior to that, I was a development director for 21 years. So needless to say, for everyone out there that has a board that wouldn't ask, I have felt and continue to feel your pain, because it probably is one of the #1 issues that we have relative to board engagement and really board members understanding their role. So we're going to walk through that today. We will, because of course we have to, touch a little bit on COVID-19 because I want to kind of lay the groundwork for you. We've been working with a number of organizations whose board members are in a bit of a state of paralysis right now. And before you all joined, I was telling Joyce about an organization that I volunteer with, where their board is debating whether they should just shut their doors, which is absolutely crazy because it's a community resource and it, is supported by community money. So some of the challenges are that you have board members that don't really understand your space, but you also have board members that are really trying to read the tea leaves when, quite frankly, it's impossible at this point. So this is the board that wouldn't ask and other scary stories for the Halloween season. So without further ado, I just wanted to touch on some of the trends of board policies, practices, and performances. I think boards are getting better at implementing honest self-assessments. And I think this is a key tool, and I'll mention this later on, of something that can be done to really energize boards towards the end of the year. Most of these are typically anonymous, but it gives the board members opportunity to be honest about their own participation and, quite frankly, about their satisfaction of being on the board, because you'll hear me talk a little bit about the fact that if board members are not engaged, often it's because they have not been engaged by the leadership of the organization. And by leadership, I mean primarily the board chair. It's very difficult, especially if you're a 1-person, 2- or 3-person shop, to really take on the duties of the board chair. And it really is very important that the board chair understands his or her role relative to engaging the board. Boards are struggling to find a path to inclusion and diversity. This has been something, and all of this information, by the way, is from BoardSource. And if there's anything I mentioned and you want a handout on it or my references, just make a note in the chat box, let Joyce know, and I will make certain that I get that information to you. So BoardSource has been surveying boards and CEOs really for about the last 25 years. I think to a survey, they're done every other year, diversity and inclusion is mentioned as an issue. So this is something where, it isn't an overnight fix, but I think particularly in these times, it's important for board members to really think about what the diversity policy might be and how they would engage it, and how they would really adopt that kind of a culture if they'd like to attract a different set of opinions, geographic location, skill sets, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I've got some good board statements for inclusion if anybody's interested. Personal giving of board members is up, but fundraising continues to be the weakest link in terms of how board leaders rate their board members and how CEOs rate their board. I think it's been hovering, if you use the old grade analogy, at about a C or a C-. for about the last 20 years. And again, it could totally be about a misalignment of expectations, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. And now, of course, I have to do a few words about COVID-19 because it certainly is on everyone's minds. It will certainly color, I think, the way fundraising looks towards the end of 2020, and it certainly may be having a greater impact on the first 2 quarters of 2021. So we're desperately trying to find an analogy in the fundraising world of what we might be able to look at to see if there's any kind of comparison. And I've got a few things that I wanted to throw out there. We really have looked at, okay, can we find a parallel between what's happening right now and the Great Recession between 2007 and 2009, 2010. So what history told us with the Great Recession is that donations actually increased slightly, and then they finally declined 10 months after the start. I think not unlike COVID-19, there's been a blast of donations that have gone out to food banks, to health service organizations, to food access organizations, to, quite frankly, in some cases, it's gone out to local businesses that communities are trying to keep alive. So what I call that is the immediate service in terms of donations has been to direct COVID response organizations, and it's a little bit more difficult if you are what I call a COVID adjacent organization, which is where a lot of the Main Street organizations are, arts organizations, certainly membership associations, museums, all of those kind of organizations. So it's very important that you begin to tell the story in the next couple of months about what you've done during the time of COVID-19 to help alleviate some of the, maybe the stress, the mental anguish, what you've done for the community, who you've partnered with. So there's good news to tell about what you've been doing. And don't forget that just because you aren't delivering food, it doesn't mean that you're not getting the job done. The other thing in terms of the Great Recession, the greatest impact was on donation size, not necessarily the number of donors giving. So don't be disheartened if in 2020, towards year end, you might find a shift towards maybe some of your donors, instead of giving you 100% of the gift that they would give, maybe they're going to be giving you 80, and another 20% would go to organizations that deal with direct services for those most impacted with COVID-19. But whatever you do, hang on to that donor stewardship. One of the challenges that we saw during the recession, and I know that there's an organization that we work with where there was an individual that had given, more than $1,000 year after year after year. His business was impacted by the recession. He had to, and so as a result, he got those major donor benefits, right? And he had a decades-long relationship with this organization. Well, his giving, because of his business and the decline in his business, had to drop to below that major gift level, and immediately those donor recognition benefits were removed. So what does that tell you? That tells you that I just want you for your money, not for your relationship. So be really circumspect about looking at where people are coming in at the end of the year, and let them know that you understand, and you hope that in 2021, they will seek to restore the funding to your organizations at the full level. This is really an important message, especially to get to your board. Nonprofits who backed off fundraising took longer to recover. Please do not let your board deter you from doing year-end fundraising. It would be a huge mistake. Do not decide what your donors are going to do. Allow them to make that decision themselves. So don't be afraid to ask. Ask with humility, ask with stewardship, ask with a recognition for what is happening right now, but by all means, ask. That is probably the number one thing that we've seen, that boards are trying to encourage people to back off because, oh no, we can't ask our donors now with everything that's going on. Why not? Because if you're not asking, trust me, somebody else is. And one of the greatest challenges during the recession for those organizations that didn't ask, the reason why it took them longer is people were able to meet their own personal philanthropic need through another nonprofit agency. So keep that in mind, that people want to give to you, and you're going to do everything you can possible to make certain that that happens. Again, I already said this, arts funding took the greatest hit. It's likely that arts funding will as well, only because they are, I think, uniquely designed to have a significant portion that comes in through earned income. So ticket sales stop, concession stop, gift shop sales stop, everything just shut down. And, you know, anywhere between 40 and 60% of income for a lot of arts agencies stopped immediately. They're coming back now, but the biggest challenge is that in some cases, for museums, especially children's museums, they are really losing money by opening up again. And I think what everybody is trying to figure out is, you know, once you open, you really do need to stay open. So I'm sure you've all taken part in lots and lots of virtual fundraisers, Zoom meetings. I like to attend all the ones I can because I always pick up something new. And I will tell you something, this is just as a personal aside. We have actually increased our giving to a number of new agencies this year because their messaging really touched me during the shutdown in particular. I have not donated to the YWCA here in Central Ohio for years. I think that their messaging was some of the most wonderful messaging I've seen, and it really touched my heart. They did a great job. Again, really talked about what they were doing to help others. And I remembered that. And I remembered those folks that gave me a little bit of joy during this time. So don't discount that you haven't had an impact on people. You just might not know it. And then again, and I think that we will see this with the recession, with COVID-19 as well. Donors focus their giving on those organizations they consider to be most important to them. So what should have been going on all along? That would have been donor stewardship. So if you kept in communications with your donors and if you let them know how you're doing, again, doing it with grace, with dignity, those are the ones that are really going to understand what the impact of their giving or lack thereof will have on your organization. We've seen some really interesting trends in charitable giving. And for the first quarter of the year, there was a big drop off. But I don't want you to get worried about this because the interesting thing is the first quarter only included the last 2 weeks of COVID-19 lockdown, and it actually was weak at the beginning of the year. So it's a little hard to tell what that might mean, but it really picked up again in the second quarter. The good news is in the second quarter of 2020, donors of less than $250 were up by almost 20%. So those smaller donors are coming back, and typically they were the ones that we lost when the Tax Reform Act of 2017 came in, because the number of people that itemized went from 30% of taxpayers down to 8%. So a quick note about taxpayers. Make sure everybody in your giving universe understands that through the CARES Act, there is a special incentive this year for single people that do not itemize. There is a one-time $300 deduction that they can take for to a gift to a 501c3 organization. For a household, it's $600 if they don't itemize. However, if you do itemize, like our family, we get, instead of a 60% tax break on our charitable giving, we get 100%. And let me tell you, that is a great incentive to me this year. And we're getting together with both our accountant and our really great friend that works with us at Edward Jones, because my goal is to pay no taxes in 2021. I hate paying taxes, so this is a huge incentive for me. So we're looking at what we need to do as far as that's concerned. So really hit that as many times as you can in all of your communications. We're hoping that some of these CARES Act benefits in terms of charitable deductions will carry over into 2021, but we just don't know yet. So just a couple more facts about trends in charitable giving that we see for COVID-19. And I'm happy to send you this information as well. 54% of donors who gave to COVID-19 causes plan to maintain that giving. So people that gave to food banks really feel like they need to continue to do that. Donors are concerned about how health and human services groups will be impacted by COVID-19, but their overall concern is for all groups that they've donated to. So they do care about you. It isn't that they now only care about one aspect of the nonprofit industry. They care about you as well. 43% will support what they gave to before. So of course, ask, ask, ask. 25% will probably move some of their money over to COVID-19 groups. It looks like, in particular, if you have a good relationship in your community with the community foundation, absolutely that a third of those donors that have donor advised funds intend to increase their charitable giving this year. And now this is the other thing, because we all know that volunteers are also some of our best prospects for donors. But we also know, just based on our experience, that often those longtime donors that volunteer for libraries and volunteer for healthcare agencies and volunteer at historical societies, many of them are older, and we are expecting a drastic decrease in the number of volunteers this year and probably into next year as well. So that will certainly impact staff. That's very, very tough, because I know that volunteers really would like an answer about what's going to happen, but you don't have an answer either. So, but it doesn't mean just because you don't have an answer, please keep in touch with your volunteers and let them know what's going on. They want to hear from you. Call them up and ask them how they're doing. We're all tired of this, honestly. So I want to talk a little bit about giving in terms of boards. So Penelope Burk, and I'll send you a link to her information as well, the Cygnus survey. She's a Canadian researcher and does research both in Canada and the US, and she's fantastic. Some of her books are on donor-centered giving, are some of the best I've ever read. So there's kind of a breakdown in terms of gift requirements for board members. So 52% of boards that have staff, giving is typically required. Now, that's probably an impetus from the executive director saying to the board that they need to give at 100% level. Only 27% of boards who don't have staff give and have that giving requirement. You're going to hear me talk a little bit about, we absolutely feel that 100% giving is required, but it should be commensurate with interest and capacity, because donors look at it this way. If the organization that is the governing body of the nonprofit, who is required to really guarantee the fiscal stability of the organization through its governance, if they are not giving to the organization, then why should anybody else in the community give? Because you're the closest to the group. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Only 1 in 3 respondents stated that there was a requirement to participate in fundraising, meaning going on calls, making asks, accompanying a staff person to make an ask, signing a letter, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And only 18% of those that were took part in the survey were evaluated on a board fundraising performance. I think it's really interesting. We just did a board retreat on Monday for a conservation organization. Their biggest quandary was they didn't understand their role as board members. And then they felt because they didn't understand their role, it was very difficult for them to get involved in fundraising because they felt that they didn't have the tools and they didn't have the training. So a lot of it goes back, as you'll hear me say today, on the training and the information that's required. So 62% received a board manual when they joined the board, which is really a great thing to have, because your board member typically should include what we call a letter of agreement that outlines expectations of board members. And it also outlines what board members can expect of the staff and other volunteers. So it's a two-way street. But a board manual is really critical when they join the board. Of course, now we can keep all this information up in the clouds, so there's no problem as far as that's concerned, but it absolutely should lay out if there is a gift requirement. Again, we would prefer you to say 100% participation. Only 40% took part in any kind of a board orientation. By the way, I feel very strongly that board orientation needs to be driven by the board. Often we find that board orientation is driven by the staff, and if you only have a couple of staff members, that is just loading something on their plate. It should really be incumbent upon the board to do an orientation. I've got lots of great orientation manuals and systems and you name it, I've got it. So if you need anything, let me know. But I think it's really important for board orientation to help people understand what you're expecting of them going forward. Only 39% receive fundraising training. I think that every board meeting is an opportunity for increased education about what the organization does, and it should always include fundraising. And 6% of organizations had a budget for board training, which is a luxury, I think, these days, although 44% said the funds could be found if needed. So, and there's a lot of pro bono assistance that you can get out there as well. So don't hesitate to contact me if your board has a particular need. I'm always happy to come and talk to a board or find somebody else that would come and talk to your board as well, because the rising tide floats all boats, especially right now. So here's an oldie but goodie. This is a board source document that actually has been, oh my gosh, it's been around since 2009 and it hasn't changed one bit. So here are the 10 basic responsibility of board members. Number one, determine mission and purpose. And by the way, your mission is not a monolith. You should really look at that every couple of years. We just did this for the library board that I'm on. And back in the day in 2015, when we first developed that revised mission, we said that advocacy was a big part of our work. Actually, it hasn't been. So we recently had a retreat about recalibrating our mission and whether we continue to include advocacy in there. What is the role? What is our capability? And do we need to concentrate our efforts, because we're a small board, on advocacy when we really need to be looking at a couple of other areas? Your job as a board is to select the chief executive. That's very important. And to support and evaluate the chief executive. It's very important, board members, that you evaluate the work of the chief executive on an annual basis, because first of all, it's fair to you and your fellow board members, but it's also very fair to the chief executive. We worked with an organization a couple of years ago in Northwest Ohio, where they got into a capital campaign, and it was very clear that the chief executive might have been good at running day to day, but he was not capable of managing a capital campaign, and it was really not a good fit in terms of what the organization was growing to need. It became very awkward because the board saw that they really needed to separate the chief executive from the organization, but he had not received a review for 4 years. So needless to say, many lawyers later and a fairly big severance package, they were able to do what they needed to do. But the work improvement program that should have been instituted for this particular CEO years ago had never been in place, and they put themselves at a real disadvantage. Your goal is to ensure effective planning. Now, you don't necessarily need to develop the plan, but you need to ensure that effective planning is in place in terms of what your operations will be in the next couple of years, and in terms of planning as far as the CEO's role on a day-to-day basis. You monitor and strengthen programs and services. Definitely, this does not mean that you run them. And this is a challenge often for smaller organizations as they begin to develop their first paid staff, because often volunteers are brought in because they love a particular program and they love to run it and they want to do it. And it could be that that program really is no longer relevant in terms of what the organization wants to do. So volunteers can become disenchanted when CEOs decide that a program is no longer needed, nor is it meeting the mission of the organization. So you're there to monitor and make sure that if your after school program says that you're going to reach 50 kids, and it only reaches 30, you need to ask the questions, board members, as to why it did not reach its goal. So kick those tires, because that's your role, and look at ways those programs can be strengthened. Ensure adequate financial services, stuck right in the middle, number 6, and here's where it says fundraising. I always like to say that fundraising is a 12-step program, and step number 12 is the ask. And if you've been doing your communications and your stewardship and helping people understand what the impact of their gift is, and if you've been giving them opportunities to provide you with their input and feedback, then you've brought them into the family where the easy part is the ask. And it doesn't always have to be the board member. Often it's board and staff. It could be board and consultant. There are lots and lots of different ways. But, you know, I look at it this way. If you're not asking your donors for money, somebody else is. Or 3 or 4 people are, I guarantee it. Of course, your role is to protect the assets and provide proper financial oversight. This is where it becomes very, very important that you receive timely financial information so that you can really have the opportunity to review the finances and to ask those questions well in advance of board meetings. I used to be on a board where, I kid you not, we got the finances when we showed up at the meeting. And you know what? They were never correct. And 1 month, everything was great. And the next month, they had to lay off 4 staff people. So we knew that it wasn't that we weren't providing proper financial oversight. We had to begin to demand that we had the tools to be able to do that. And that absolutely is something that you should be able to review. And there should be a standard on your board by which time you receive materials. We have on a board that I'm on that is all volunteer. We do have a staff liaison, but we are essentially a volunteer board. We have set up a set of rules and regulations which says that our goal always is to be able to get the meeting documents out 48 hours in advance, a minimum of 24 hours. So, but 48 hours is our goal. Sometimes with more complicated organizations, maybe it should be a week. It's up to you, but there you need to be provided appropriate time to be able to review those finances and to protect the assets and to make sure the assets are being taken care of. Building a competent board. This is a huge responsibility of board members, and it's very, very important. We've got a board matrix that I'd be happy to share with you, but it's very, very important that you look to consider what your skills are that are needed, what might be required. One of the challenges that we had with a library board that I'm on is that years ago when we were looking for board members, where did we look? We looked for people that volunteered at our book sale, which was very successful, by the way, and continues to be so. Well, before COVID-19, we've had to suspend all of those. So as a consequence, what did we talk about at the board? We talked about the book sale, the book sale, the book sale, the book sale. We weren't talking about membership growth. We weren't talking about other fundraising. We weren't talking about policies. We talked about the subject matter that was top of mind to the people that we brought in because we were only looking at a very narrow group of volunteers to come on board. So it's very important that you look at your board as a serious commitment, because if you bring on a board member who is not really looking at your mission uppermost, you may be stuck with that person for 3 years, and vice versa. They may feel the same way. So it's really important that you take time to do that. And by the way, just because someone is interested in being on your board does not mean you have to say yes to them. I think committees are the best way as a proving ground for board members, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. You have to ensure legal and ethical integrity. So what does that mean? You have looked at the Attorney General's basic guide for charitable boards. It's a great document. I'd be happy to send that link to Joyce so you can download it. It basically talks about duty of loyalty, care, and the competence that's required. In other words, if you need to make certain that the 990 is taken care of, you may need to make certain everybody has filed every year a conflict of interest statement. You need to make certain that there are the appropriate financial oversight in terms of accounting. You need to make certain that you have knowledge of grants that are being submitted to make certain that whatever the organization said it was going to do in that grant actually happens, because you are ultimately responsible for it. There was a situation with the job that I had when we lived in St. Louis, Missouri, where we found out on staff that our executive director was accepting money for one program, but really using it for another. So I found myself in the position where I had to call our development chair of our board, and I was very close to our development chair, And I said to him, Tom, I need you to ask this question at the board meeting tomorrow, and whatever you do, don't look at me. So we were able to really nip that in the bud, but quite frankly, this was an executive director who really felt that she was that whatever she wanted was what was best for the organization, which absolutely was not the truth. And about 3 years after I left, she was fired. So they should have done that beforehand. And then enhance the organization's public standing. You as board members are ambassadors for the organization. And if you don't know what to say as an ambassador, then that goes back to the education that should happen at all board meetings. So now on to the next one. So again, it is ultimately the board's responsibility to ensure the organization has the resources, including financial resources, to carry out the mission. All right, fundraising responsibilities and board members. 100% participation in my book is non-negotiable and imperative, and no, your volunteer time does not count. It should be time as well as treasure. I know how those are old chestnuts, but it needs to be both. You can't phone it in, but again, you need to make certain that you're making a gift to the organization. Some foundations absolutely require it. If there's not 100% giving, you won't get any money from these foundations. Board members should always make their own gift first. You need to lead by example, and again, commensurate with interest and capacity. Everybody's interest and capacity is different. I'm certain that all of your board members have a high level of interest in your organization, but everybody is at a different spot. I'm in a much better spot right now than I was when my daughter was in college. But again, if you've got kids in college, if you're trying to deal with, if you're trying to deal with elderly parents, and perhaps you're needing to support whatever might be required to be in assisted living, there's all different kind of circumstances. And how do you find out about that? The board chair or the development chair should be having one-on-one conversations with board members, treating them like the very, very valuable resource that they are. It's really important to find out where a board member is coming from and how they're feeling about what they might be able to give over the course of a year. And it's all relative, right? So we did some work a while back with legal aid. And one of the things that was really interesting with legal aid is that they have in their charter that I want to say it was a minimum of 3 members of their board that had to have been former recipients of their services. I can tell you that I got to know some of the folks that had been helped by legal aid. Some was, a lot of it had to do with healthcare issues and with being sued by hospitals and by collection agencies. It was really, really complicated stuff that in some cases threatened to bankrupt some people. And they were so grateful for the service that they received from legal aid. And in the cases of a number of them, they could only give $100. But their gift of $100 was much more of a sacrifice than the gift of the $5,000 that the lawyer gave, who had an antique car collection, who was also on that board. And the important thing is that you want your board members to be able to say to people that they know or other potential donors, I dug deep because I love this organization. I hope you'll do the same. Digging deep is something that you have to define for yourselves. So fundraising responsibilities and board members, you can't hire your way out of it. We have worked with so many organizations that say, oh my gosh, I can't wait to get that development director because woo, then we don't have to do this fundraising anymore. Absolutely not. If you have a good development director, you should be doing more fundraising because they'll be bringing you along as your partner. And remember that I'm going to skip to the final bullet point. Donors give more readily when asked by a leadership volunteer. One of the things that was really interesting when I worked at Big Brothers Big Sisters, a donor said to me, because I went to go see them individually, and they said, Lori, it would be great if you would bring a board member with you next time. I really, really like you, but you're paid to ask me for money. I'd like to meet some people like me that are doing this from their own volition. So it's really important. You don't need to ask, but you can go with somebody and really corroborate what that meaning is as a volunteer. And of course, we always hope that the mission of your organization should be a top interest in the top 3 is what we always ask for. Now, We all know we've been faced with a circumstance where you're trying to get funding from maybe a corporation, and perhaps you were able to get somebody from that corporation to join your board, as happened with one of our clients where this was the 9th board that this individual was on. And it was important to have representation from this organization, but we kind of knew where we stood as far as the hierarchy was concerned. And we made the best of it, but in the end, really recommended that this board member probably roll off after a couple of years and try to find somebody that in the corporation that could be much more directly involved, because it sets a bad example for other board members. When you're working hard and you're showing up at the meetings and other people don't show up, it's kind of like, well, I guess what we're doing is not really that important. So it's really, you just need to know that every board member has that same responsibility. All right, here's what fundraising is. Because then, of course, I'm going to tell you what it's not. But this is what fundraising is. It is offering others an opportunity. Keep that in mind, opportunity for philanthropic investment in a mission you believe in and are passionate about. And if you have board members that really, when they look themselves in the mirror, if they're not passionate about your mission, it's okay to have that conversation based on where you feel you need to be between now and the end of the year and where you're going in 2021. It is totally okay to have that conversation about whether this might be a time, knowing about the fundraising work that will need to be done in the future. Maybe it's time for that person to separate himself from the organization. Again, at the retreat that we led on Monday, that is exactly what some of the board members said in an anonymous survey. They basically said, we totally understand that fundraising needs to be at the forefront now, but that's not what I was brought on to do, and it might be time for me to separate myself from the organization. That is totally okay. Do it with dignity, bless and release. That's what we say. Fundraising is providing donors with a chance to share their beliefs and values with like-minded people. You believe in what I believe in, and it is great to see that I have community as a result of our shared beliefs. Fundraising is additional streams of connections through volunteerism and leadership. It's not just giving a gift, it's an opportunity to be involved as a volunteer, to be involved as a leader of a committee, maybe to join the board. Fundraising is the opportunity to make an impact through something that is bigger than me, something that is not about me, but about somebody else. It's a chance to give back. We hear so many stories about people. I mean, there's a wonderful story with the Dayton Community Foundation where Virginia Toolman, I want to say Virginia moved to Florida, I don't know, maybe like in the 1980s. Well, they did a really good job of keeping in touch with Virginia because Virginia really felt that Dayton had given her family the money that it had, and it afforded her the lifestyle that she led. And she always recognized that this was a chance to give back to her community. And when she passed away, she left $40 million to the Dayton Community Foundation. They understood that Virginia had that feeling about the Dayton community. And most of all, fundraising is an opportunity. It's not about asking, it's about telling meaningful stories, something that has really grabbed you as a donor. One of the things that I always like to tell, it's a story about a client that we had. It's Associated Charities in Ashland, Ohio. Fabulous, fabulous emergency food group. What a wonderful organization. One of the best campaigns we ever worked on. It was amazing. They raised $1.5 million in 5 months. It didn't hurt that their building was falling down around them. That's always helpful to get the message across. But they really separated themselves out from other emergency food organizations because they had a birthday room. So lots of other food banks, they're great about remembering Thanksgiving. They don't want you to go without gifts at Christmas for the kids or food for your relatives or your family. But Associated Charities set up a birthday room where if your child anywhere between 0 and 18 was having a birthday, you could go in and get a gift and get a cake mix and get some eggs and get some frosting mix and get some candles and get wrapping paper, because they wanted people to understand that this was a circumstance that in many cases was through no fault of the people that were coming to this pantry, but they wanted to make certain that the kids were remembered on their particular birthday. So it was, I mean, I cannot tell you how many people gravitated towards that, because it really was a differentiating factor that touched so many people as well as me. Here's what fundraising is not. Please don't ever use these terms. And if another board member or staff member uses this, or if a board member uses this term as a staff, please correct them. And again, what do you correct them with? You're offering others an opportunity for philanthropic investment in a mission you believe in and are passionate about. It is not picking someone's pocket, twisting someone's arm, begging. It is not quid pro quo, although it happens, but true philanthropy is not quid pro quo. It is not hitting up your friends. It is not shaking people down, or pick your own equally dreadful metaphor. It is not any of these things. And if this is what your board members are telling you, they are wrong and you need to correct them. And if training does not correct it, if igniting their passion does not correct it, and if finding a story for them does not correct it, you need to have a conversation with them about the possibility of leaving the board, because that is not who you want out in the community being your ambassador. So what's the deal with board members who won't fundraise? Let's look at the underlying issues, because that's what it's all about. It's about engagement. It's about communication. It's about building a culture. It's about education and igniting passion. So let's talk about some of these issues. Oh, here's my little things. Okay, here's what you think. All right, staff members, this is what you think. My board members won't fundraise. Board member, here's what you think. Fundraising, no one ever told me that, oh, excuse me, I forgot that. No one ever told me that was one of my responsibilities. How many times have you heard from board members that they weren't told during their orientation that they were going to be required to make a gift? It happens so frequently, and board members say, oh, you know what, they'll come to love us, they're going to want to write that check. That is not the case. Be upfront, and if they're not interested in making a gift, not a problem, lesson release. So you have to lay the groundwork for proactive board engagement. You need a matrix analysis to match skills and needs. You should have a candidate application process and expectations, and definitely go through a screening and an interview. The more potential board members know about what you have in mind, the better the board members will be. It is really, really important. This is a really important position. And again, you may be working with this individual for 3 years, and you really don't want to hear year 3, the same thing you heard on year 1. Nobody told me I had to make a gift. So it's really important to lay out the expectations. There is no reason why you should apologize as an organization for having expectations. We have said to many board members, I'd rather have 4 really great board members than 10 board members where I've got 2 live wires and the rest are dead wood. You should excuse my expression, but you describe people that way. So it's really important that you set up a process, and I've got lots of information that I could send to you. In fact, at the Glenn College, I teach a summer skills class on board skills. So I've got lots of information. So if there's anything you're interested in, just let me know. I've got it. So lay the groundwork for proactive board engagement. And I have a sample of a board letter of agreement that I can send to Joyce and she can forward to all of you. You're expecting them that charity of choice, one of the top 3. You're clear about their role as far as the board is concerned. You're very clear about their participation. Attendance, this is where attendance comes in. And also it is where you might have a requirement for serving on a committee. That's very, very important. I think it's really important for board members to serve on a committee, but if you're a small board, sometimes the board acts collectively as some of those key committees, but participation is very important. Positive representation, you're going to make it really clear that they're ambassadors in the community. Financial support, lay it out. You have to give an annual gift. You have to support the fundraiser. If there's a capital campaign, you need to be 100% board. Your board needs to be 100% behind the capital campaign. You should be willing to consider a planned gift. All of this needs to be laid out. Uphold confidentiality and bylaws, absolutely critical. And it should be a signed commitment. Now, bear in mind that the example that we have is not legally binding, but it's interesting when people sign something, somehow it feels like it was more important than if they didn't sign it. So this is a simple thing that you can provide to people that will put in their mind that, you know what, this place means business. They are going to really take my volunteer time seriously, and I'm going to do the same in terms of my engagement with them. All right, what you think? Oh, good, I stopped doing that little jumpy thing, sorry. My board members are ineffective. What your board thinks. We're not clear on our roles as board members. We're ineffective because we don't know what we're supposed to be doing. That was very clear with the retreat that we just led on Monday. Or maybe what they want me to do isn't what I really want to do, and couldn't we have a discussion about something I'd rather do? That would be great. Training is the key. Again, we go back to the orientation. Should be a thorough overview of the organizational structure, programs, services, staff, if there are staff, finances. Where are you? If you have a financial issue, spell it out there. I was a volunteer on a board. I kid you not. Again, it was the same board where we weren't getting the financial information in a timely fashion. And one meeting, everything was great. And the next meeting, 4 people were laid off. One of our board members stood up when they heard about the layoffs and basically shouted out that he had been lied to. That was an ugly scene, but I will tell you, it changed all of our feelings about being on that board. He was right, and that is exactly how we all felt. But there was not, and I don't want to say that the executive director was not being forthcoming. That person didn't understand the finances. So it was a really difficult decision. Job descriptions. Every board member should have a job description. There should be general, excuse me, a job description for general board duties, and then one specific to officers, chairs, and committee members. I think probably the most important committee that you can have is a nominating and governance committee, which is a year-round strategy for identification, evaluation, and education. This is really, really important. Nominating doesn't take place once a year. It should be a year-round strategy of how to reach out into the community at specific groups, looking at pools of candidates, and really encouraging your board members to think about the skills and the talents that are needed. And again, education in terms of educating the board at every single board meeting. So what you think? My board doesn't show up for meetings. What your board thinks? Most of the time at board meetings, board meetings is spent on staff or committee reports. So it's kind of like blah, 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 and there really isn't any substantive discussion. That is not uncommon, and most of the time, the Ballad of the board meetings are a waste of time. And I left this in there because I remember when we actually used to use this as a euphemism, but now a lot of us are phoning it in, or they are zooming it in. But the feeling that I could phone it in, I don't really need to be there, there's no discussion, I'm just listening to everybody else. I don't even know why I'm on this board. The consent agenda is a great tool for board members to institute so that you begin to have some concerted strategic discussions at every board meeting. And basically a consent agenda takes all those regular old reports that you go through. It's the program committee, it's the minutes from the last meeting, it's the treasurer's report, it's the, whatever, fill in the blank. So these are all the reports that are sent in advance to inform and foster meaningful discussions and decisions. And the consent agendas are voted on as a whole, which means that there's no further discussion required based on these rote, regular reports that are sent to the board members. Now, of course, if there's a problem, you're going to raise that when you get that information in advance. So supposing you get the treasurer's report in advance, it's part of the consent agenda, but you have some questions. So you're going to reach out to the treasurer, and maybe you're going to reach out to the executive director and say, I need these questions answered in order to feel comfortable that the treasurer's report is part of the consent agenda. So again, it's a lot of getting out the information in advance so you can foster meaningful discussions and decisions. Sorry, I forgot to ask on that. And what you're going to find when you institute a consent agenda, it will typically save about a half an hour of that blah, blah, blah committee reports, and it's a lot more engaging. So it allows for really meaningful opportunities for discussion. And I happen to be the board chair of a local small nonprofit. And what we've instituted this year is at the end of every board meeting, we are having an executive session. That means all staff members leave, and we as a board talk about those issues that we need to have an open and honest discussion about ourselves. Now, our staff went crazy when I first suggested this, because what did they think? That we were going to be talking about them. To a certain extent, we have, because I will tell you that we happen to be a board that is connected with an incredibly effective and efficient staff, but we have to have a frank discussion that is amongst ourselves about what we need to do to build up our board so we are not so staff driven. And frankly, what was happening was every time an issue came up, we would defer to the staff to answer those questions, when it should be incumbent upon us to be able to answer those questions ourselves. I think it's worked out really, really well, and I've been very pleased. I can't say that all of the discussions have been comfortable, but that is okay too. And by the way, executive sessions, there's no minutes kept, so it's not an official part of the meeting, so you can have a very frank discussion. Effective committee structure. This is really important so board members don't get bored. Effective committees are formed when you have effective leadership. And that, again, is something that can be guided by the board chair. There's a lot of good information out there. In your bylaws, it typically says what is a standing committee and what is an ad hoc committee. I always feel that development and fundraising needs to be a standing committee, because this is an ongoing activity. And then committee participation should be, I feel, it should be mandatory, because especially if you meet every other month, that's a long time in between months. And the board, the board retreat that we gave on Monday, they only met quarterly. My recommendation, just based on where they are right now and the need to really build the board and really to find their role, I recommended that they meet on a minimum of every other month and maybe monthly, just for the next year until they really put their structure together. All right, what you think? I communicate with my board all the time, but they are unresponsive. What your board thinks? The executive director only contacts us when they need a favor. We really don't know what's going on. I cannot tell you the time, the number of times, and as a development director, I was guilty of this myself. Oh my gosh, my board members never respond to my emails. Well, maybe I was emailing them at 3 o'clock and I needed an answer by 5 o'clock, which is really unrealistic, because hello, they have lives. So really important that as you talk about, those one-on-one meetings, whether it's staff or board chair with board members, what is the desired level of participation in terms of communications, and when do they need to get it? So it's really important that you do that. So the great communicator, true or false? And this is true of board members too. I've heard this as well. Oh my gosh, my board is wonderful. I communicate with them all the time. My perception is your reality, right? So I'm thinking that as a board chair, I'm doing a wonderful job, but your reality is, I don't know what's going on. Your reality is what I need to listen to. You need to find a champion. If you're looking for change in your board, you need to find a champion. Excuse me. Nonprofit leaders need to find a champion to make sure that they're able to find someone that is aligned with what they feel is the vision for the organization. This is where it gets really tricky. When presidencies are only a year long, because you need to make certain that you have a succession plan in place where there is some continuity of effort. One of the challenges that we have had in the Association of Fundraising Professionals, in the chapter that we have here, and in many other chapters as well, is that often there is an initiative that one board chair wants to institute, and maybe the incoming board chair didn't like it, so then that effort gets dropped. So it's like back and forth and back and forth. So there's no continuity in terms of what you want to offer. So finding your champion is really important. I have to say that with a lot of boards right now, because COVID-19 has just skewed everything, we are recommending that a lot of nonprofits, perhaps if the executive director or the CEO feels that he or she has had a good relationship with the current board president or board chair, and that board chair started his or her term January 1 of 2020, it might not be a bad idea, if you already haven't done this, consider asking that board chair, if your bylaws allow it, to stay on for another year. We're in for it, folks, until the middle of 2021, perhaps until September of 2021. So that continuity, I think, would be really good if you feel that your volunteer leadership has done a good job of helping to shepherd through your organization. We know of a couple of organizations where that's not been the case, so it might be a good idea that they change their leadership, but think about what you need for really to the end of 2021 in terms of is it steady as she goes, or do you need to find somebody new in that leadership position? Work the lines of communication in between the spaces. In other words, please communicate board chairs, board presidents in between board meetings. I had to have a really frank and honest discussion with a board member who was not able to attend our last board meeting where we had the executive session about diversity. We have failed. This board that I'm on has failed in its responsibility to have a diverse board, and we recognize that it's just not one conversation. So this is going to be a long-term strategy, and step one is developing a statement for our board relative to inclusion, diversity, equality, and access. Our staff has one, but our board does not, and that's our first step. And this board member that I had a conversation with is going to help me really move that forward, which is really great. And then again, don't forget, your board members have a day job. They really do have a day job, and you know, sometimes they can't get back to you immediately. Doesn't make them a bad person. Maybe it means that you should have contacted them before. And you know what? There's nothing wrong with saying on a Thursday morning, I really need to have an answer by Friday afternoon. And if you're not able to get back to me by then, I will assume that you approve XYZ communication going out. So always give yourself that timeline. But you know, everybody has an emergency, but try to limit those number of emergencies because they're tiring. All right, what you think? The board members are micromanagers. They're into the day-to-day administration. Board members, what you think is we are passionate and dedicated to our mission. We're not micromanaging your programs. We just feel that we know more than you do. So this is often a challenge, especially if you're a organization that has been growing, and now you have your first permanent board, you know, executive director or development director. It is time for board members to understand that they need to step back and the day-to-day administration is not their job. We are going through that right now with one of our clients, where the governance committee seems to feel that they need to be writing the job description. Not correct. So we are working on getting that changed. So again, you need to step back and really look at what you need to do. You're not in charge of day-to-day. Your job is to support the executive director. The executive director's job is to keep you informed, but your job is not to look at you know, the day-to-day. So what's your organizational lifestyle? If you're an infancy and startup, you're typically all volunteer. Juvenile, a little bit of growth, maybe there's a paid person, and that's when usually the cracks start to show, because maybe some of your founders are saying, oh my gosh, it's just not as much fun as it used to be. That's code word to me for oh gosh, the thing that I used to like doing, they don't want me to do anymore. Maybe that's totally okay. Adolescence, growth and decline, you've got, you know, staff, you've got somebody in charge of development, and then maturity, you're established, you've got a great board, you're really looking at governance policies, you're looking at other issues besides what's been happening on a day-to-day basis. So what nonprofit leadership training is being offered? There are lots of opportunities for people to be able, especially now, to attend free webinars. Again, recorded sessions, whatever people might need, help them find out what they need to do to really improve their leadership training as far as your board is concerned. And effective channeling of energies into mutually beneficial and meaningful projects. How many of you are all dealing with a fundraiser that you just don't want to deal with anymore, and maybe it's a blessing that you had to cancel it this year? Maybe you can ditch that golf tournament once and for all. So let's hope, although I've heard that some golf tournaments are still happening. By the way, I'm not a fan of golf tournaments, just by the way. It's one of the most expensive fundraisers you can do. So here's what you think. The board does not act strategically. What your board thinks. Do we have a strategic plan? They might not even know it. What are you doing to bring that to the forefront? Seriously, do you have a strategic plan? It's okay if you don't. You should have some kind of a plan, but does a strategic plan exist? Does it include both programmatic and fundraising goals? I worked at an organization once where we had a very serious, long-term, and lofty strategic plan. It was a 4-year plan back in the day when we did that. It did not have one single fundraising goal built in relative to whether we could pay for the programs that we were expanding. And we went from a $250,000 surplus to a $350,000 deficit in 1 year and had to lay off 9 staff people. It was traumatic because our strategic plan only talked about program growth and not whether we had the fundraising capacity to be able to support that. Does your strategic plan have a board governance component? It should always be about board improvement, board education, board members, board 100% giving, board nominating. How is the strategic plan translated into the work of the board if you have one? What are the touch points? Is it a reference at every board meeting? When we do strategic plans for organizations that we work with, we create a dashboard which dumps all of the goals, objectives, and timelines into one 11x17. And the purpose of that is that you pull it out at every board meeting and say, where are we? You know, nothing, I think, ever, never say never, but very rarely does it happen that a strategic plan is able to go exactly according to the calendar, but revisit it. And you know what? If it's a year in and you haven't achieved that objective for the strategic plan, but maybe everything's been okay, maybe it turns out you didn't need that objective. But it certainly should be something that you discuss at every board meeting. And what I always like to do agendas where at the bottom of every agenda, what did we do in today's board meeting to advance the mission of the organization? What did you do? So it's really important to be able to have that conversation. All right, what you think? Our board does not support our fundraising events. Your board thinks every board member is treated like an ATM machine. Every time something's happening, I need this, I need that, I need this. The board that I currently chair, a couple of years ago, my criticism was, you are nickel and diming us to death. You have to come up with some other structure for board members. So think about, look, everybody has emergencies, but plan in advance, again, through your letter of agreement, so people are really clear. Annual gift, support the fundraisers that you have, support a capital campaign if you're going to do it, think about a planned gift. So make certain that everybody understands what they do. I will tell you something, that with the boards that I'm on, I am really supportive of their special events. So I do raise money for it. I will tell you, I just hate to, I do hate to ask my friends for money. I think it's because I do it for a living. I am totally great about asking a perfect stranger or a corporate, representative or foundation representative. I just pay for their tickets. It's just so much easier. So just make that clear that that's an alternative. And then I follow up with them. I make sure they have a good time. And, I want, and typically, if they come and I buy their ticket, their ticket, often they'll make a donation to the organization in my honor, which is really flattering. So again, don't nickel and dime your board members. It just really is, it just is going to create a feeling that they're there for one purpose and one purpose only, and not for their skill sets. So how do you successfully tap into their resources? Our request for financial support clearly stated and coordinated. Make sure that if the development chair is asking a board member for a gift and you've got a development director, that the two are working in tandem so that it isn't a call from one day and a call from the other the next day. What creative options can you offer to members so they can add to your bottom line? Now is the time to think creatively. Can they do printing for you? Maybe they can't give you a gift this year. Can they do printing for you? Can they donate something that has to do with your programs? Can they make a donation that supports the food for an event if you're going to be doing something? See, I'm thinking back in the old days when we had food, when we had events. What else can they do for you that would be creative? So be thinking of other ways that you might be able to tap into that. They still have to make an annual gift, but there might be other ways that they can maximize that gift as well. Have a personal and confidential discussion about capacity and interest, and it should be done by a peer. It should not be done by the CEO. Why? Because the board members collectively are the CEO or executive director's boss. So in our fundraising world, the person who is in the department does not ask the supervisor for the gift. So it's peer-to-peer, very important. So what you think, our agency deserves a better board. What your board thinks, our board is doing a great job. We're fabulous. And we tell each other that at every single board meeting. And, and then when all the staff members leave, they complain about us. So where is the misalignment of your organization? Clearly, there is one. So are you living in a parallel universe, or the joke with this song, so Reality Used to Be a Friend of Mine is a song from the late 90s by a group called PM Dawn. So I was at one organization where there was such a complete disconnect between the board and the staff that I used to sing the song in my office. And if you feel like you are living in a parallel universe relative to what your board thinks is happening and what you know on the ground is happening, there needs to be a course correction. If there's a total disconnect in perception of the demand, it demands an assessment of the CEO of the board of the CEO. So the CEO has got to do an assessment of the board. The board has to do an assessment of the CEO or the executive director. The board needs to do an assessment of the board. And the board needs to do an assessment of the chair, and then you have to do a self-assessment. What is going on? We did something that was really interesting with a local group last year where we had a really good assessment tool. I'd be happy to share it with you, that the board members filled out, and then we had the staff fill it out. And there were some gaps where the board rated themselves a 5, that was the highest, and the staff was rating them as a 2. So we quickly went through and we could see the misalignment right away. It's where there was, now, 4 to 4.5, that's fine. There's always a little bit of wiggle room, right? But there was a huge misalignment, and it really required going back and having some very honest conversations. And an assessment is the great way to do this. And I've got some great tools. Here's what you're saying: we can't attract any decent board members. What your board member is saying, sorry, it should be your board member. I was getting a little personal here. I can't wait until my term is up. I can't wait to get out of here. So again, I don't feel engaged. I don't feel like I've been involved. I feel like my time has been wasted. I feel like it just brought me on for, who I work for. I feel like I'm a token. I feel like it really has not been a good experience. So that's, again, governance is a year-round committee responsibility. Nominating is part of that job. It is a year-round committee responsibility. Hold out for what you need. Somebody who is breathing is not really what you're trying to talk about. Now, I realize that as you're looking for diversity, this can be very difficult, but one of the jobs that your board should be working on along with your staff is, can you put together a packet that talks about your board, talks about your organization, talks about where you're going, talks about the job description, talks about the time commitment, and could you put together a packet, and could your governance and nominating committee reach out to or could you enlist the staff members to reach out to HR departments, corporate contributions folks, and say, in the future, we would love to have somebody from your corporation. This is what we would hope to find. This is what our expectations are. This is what they can expect of us. And if you would be on the lookout to see if there's a match with your staff, that would be great. And I can tell you that with some corporations like Nationwide, it could be a year and a half till that match is made. And it's very important that you make it clear that just anybody will not be, is not what you need. Because trust me, the person that comes on that you think is just anybody, they'll figure it out pretty quickly. And the last thing you want, especially if this is someone from a corporation, the last thing that you want is for them to go back to the corporate contributions person or the HR person and say, you know what, It was a total waste of my time. I don't recommend that you send any other staff people from this corporation to that nonprofit. So be careful. Consider a committee trial run. Great opportunity to see if they show up at committee meetings, if they have ideas, if they participate. Guess what? If they don't participate in a committee, they're probably not going to be any better when it comes to the board. So make it really clear that this is how you start people out. You use committees as a trial run. I used to work for an organization where we actually had a probationary board year. We had a trial run board year, and we had a very honest discussion with the board member at the end of that year. And if it wasn't working, it no harm, no foul. And by the way, millennials are not the silver bullet. Everybody is looking for the millennials on their board. 9 times out of 10, that's not how they like to serve. As the parent of a millennial, I can tell you that there was our local library governance board in Worthington. Their board term is 7 years. You know, my daughter's 26. Not in a million years would she ever do that. She doesn't know what she's doing 7 months from now, let alone 7 years. But everybody talks about, oh, how can we get younger people involved? Younger people involved. You've got this is not something, along with the diversity, that is an overnight fix. There needs to be a policy. There needs to be a change in the way you have communications. There may need to be a change in the when you have meetings. There certainly needs to be a robust committee structure, and there needs to be an authentic and sincere desire that is demonstrated that you are working to make this a meaningful relationship with a different type of board member that you're bringing on. It is not one and done by any means. So active, not passive recruitment is the word of the day. Actually, that is 4 words. You want to have a matrix of skills. You want to have an interview checklist, AKA your board manual, which again can be kept in the cloud now. Policies and procedures and bylaws. Annual report, Form 990. Actually, I think some is S990, some is N990. It depends on what your annual assets are. Audited financials and operating budget, or financials. You might not always have them audited. Again, it depends on the size of your organization. Long range plan. Long range could be 1.5 years. What's your plan? List of members and terms. Job descriptions and requirements. Committee descriptions. Organizational charts for boards and staff. Programs descriptions and statistics. And marketing and development collaterals. Once you get the framework of that board manual put together, it's really easy to update and very simple to do. So it's something, quite frankly, that you should work on, obviously with staff, but this is primarily the role of the board secretary. The board secretary should be charged with keeping all those materials that are required for the board manual, because they are the documents, they are the official documents of the organization. So that's what the board secretary's role is. So here's what you're saying. Our board thinks they know about fundraising than our development staff. What your board member, she meaning me at this point, the staff shoot down every idea we have. They are so negative. I've heard this a million times, but it is very true that many board members come up with great ideas and say, now here, you go do it. It needs to be very clear from the board president or board chair that especially if you have a small staff, that if you say it, you own it. There's nothing wrong with that. And if they can't own it, they need to understand that your one person staff is up to their eyeballs in work already. And there just isn't an opportunity to get this done. Maybe the board member that had idea can go out and recruit other volunteers and work with the development director. But it is really important that board members say, hey, I have an idea for so-and-so, let me know how that works out. It's not going to work out, trust me. It should be a service-centered approach when you're looking at that. The number one reason volunteers fundraise for an organization is because they felt a personal or emotional connection. In what ways do you foster that connection? In what ways do you do it as the board chair? In what ways do you do it as the executive director? In what ways do your staff members do it? In what ways do your rank and file volunteers do it? What is fostering that connection? I will tell you that we're donors, certainly not at a large level, to be honest with you, although we're certainly thinking of increasing our gift to Shadowbox. They go in there and of course, I'm talking pre-COVID, the minute you walk in the door, regardless of the amount of money that you might give, they make you feel like you are the most important person on earth. And it is really amazing. So yesterday, which was so nice, the group that we did the board retreat for, they sent me flowers. And it was funny when the person at the door delivered the flowers, said, "Oh, are these from your husband?" I said, "Oh, no, I'm sure it's from a client," because that just would not happen. I was flabbergasted. So if they ask me to help them again, of course I'm going to do that. Everybody likes a little bit of appreciation, and they feel that personal or emotional connection in that they were listened to. It's not about the rubber chicken dinner. It's not about the tchotchke. It is about you heard what I'm interested in, and you've made an effort to make certain that that I know that you know what I'm interested in, and you want to have a conversation with me about that. That's very, very important. Because very dedicated volunteers, no matter how dedicated they are, they can only stand being treated like the old shoe in the closet for so long. I have seen really great volunteers that have been dedicated in terms of their time and significant amounts of money finally say, "I give up." Don't let them get to that point. Volunteers should have a sense of fulfillment because board members are volunteers, and that they are making a difference. And asking for advice is a double-edged sword. So remember, when you ask board members for advice, you should make it very clear in advance. It's totally okay to say to them, "Now, we want to hear what you have to say. Understand that we may not be able to act on that, and we'll tell you why we didn't act on that. But we want to know what you think about this." Here's a perfect example, an organization that we're working with. The last year they gave an additional donation to fund one of their really great staff members to go on a conference that was going to take place in the Caribbean. I had a call from this donor yesterday saying, "Hey, Lori, do you know if that conference ever took place?" So number one, you never want to have the donor calling the consultant to find out what happened with the money. But imagine what great conversation could have taken place with that donor if a board member had called them and said, "Jim, I need to tell you this. This is what happened. We weren't able to do this travel. If you'd be willing to allow us to do this, we'd like this to go towards something else, or we would be happy to give you back the money because this program is not going to happen." So, again, if you're going to take a gift, if you're going to ask for advice, it's a double-edged sword. You need to be prepared for that communication because someone is going to want to know, "Hey, I gave you this idea, whatever happened, I never heard back from you." Or, "Hey, I gave you this gift, I never know what happened." Communication is really critical, really critical. So I want to end, before I answer any questions, and I certainly hope there are some, 10 things your board can do by 12/31/20. Easy, easy, easy. Host a board thankathon that stresses gift impact and results. Get your board members together, ask everybody to call 6 people and say, "Sue, I cannot tell you how much your gift has meant to us this year because this has not been an easy year. Here's what we used your gift for. This is the results, and I can't thank you enough. I hope your family's well. I hope you're staying safe. I hope your holidays are happy, even in these strange circumstances." Boom. Don't mention the letter that's coming. Don't mention this email solicitation. Nothing. Don't mention it. Call, thank, gush, done. Impact and results. Easy. Board members can do that. Hold a strategic planning session, also known as let's get through 2021. We were thinking that, all would be hunky-dory January 2021. We don't think so. So hold a strategic planning discussion that just really talks about the next, 16 to 18 months. That will be really critical. Find out arm them with some of the information that you have found out about what the expectations are. Look at what your budgets are. Talk realistically about what the expectations might be. Share stories with them about services that you provided during COVID-19 or meaningful interchanges that you've had, and encourage them to find their own stories. This is a great opportunity for board members to sit and consider what has been meaningful to them as far as their intersection with your organization is concerned. Get their commitment to 2 board openers. And what do I mean by that? I've got a little worksheet I'm happy to share with you that basically says, okay, board members, between now and 12/31/2020, I want you to come up with a strategy where you're going to open up the doors to either individuals, corporations, or foundations that have the capacity to make a significant gift. Now, significant is in the eye of the beholder. And here's what I'm going to do to open up the door. I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do that. And here's what I need to be able to do it. So here's what I'm going to do. Here's what you as an organization or a board need to do to help me. So it's your plan between now and the end of the year. It's not asking for money. It's just opening doors. And we're working for one client right now that is not really very well known, but they have a wonderful, wonderful mission. And when people read about the information, they do take our calls and they do take our Zoom meetings, which is great. So take advantage of the fact that everybody, a lot of people are still working from home. So this is an opportunity to introduce your organization through a board door opener and say, you know what, we would love to position our organization for some support in 2021. We know that 2020 is gone, but 2021, we'd love to continue this conversation. Giving Tuesday on the 1st of December, spread the word. Spread the word out to your friends, make a gift. Why not? Conduct a board 360 evaluation. Again, CEO evaluates the board. Board evaluates the CEO. Board evaluates the board as a whole. Board members evaluate one another and the board chair. Board member evaluates him or herself. Write thank you notes to donors. Oh, and by the way, with that evaluation, then come up with your 5 to 6 things that you're going to do that you can enact now to have a better board by the time you get into that first meeting of 2021. Excuse me. Write thank you notes to donors. People, I don't know about you, but I don't get any mail anymore. I just get like the Costco catalog or whatever's coming through. A lot of Orvis. My husband loves Orvis, so I get a lot of Orvis. Write a thank you note. That's fantastic. Nobody's getting any mail anymore. Put a personal PS on solicitation letters. Identify policies that would have helped you during COVID-19, like attendance and diversity. You know what? If you're having an attendance problem right now during COVID-19, when things are really hitting the fan, you need to have a conversation with that board member about whether they're going to be able to fulfill their volunteer commitment, which is showing up. Showing up is really important. And then make sure that all board members give at the 100% level commensurate with interest and capacity. That is really, really critical and super important, so you can let everybody know that you have a board that is behind you 100% of the way, and that you're all giving as much as you can and as deeply as you can, because this is one of your top 3 charities. So with that, I will say thank you and field some questions if there's any burning questions out there.
Thank you so much, Lori. That was great. So we have a couple of questions that have come in already. First, the guide for charity boards from the Attorney General's office, I put in the handouts box.
Perfect.
That's accessible for all of you. First question, you mentioned that volunteerism is down by 20%. What do you attribute that to, COVID or the freedom of not volunteering?
I actually think that I think right now it's COVID, but I think in 2021, it may be the freedom of not volunteering. I think that it may turn into that. And a lot of it is because you look at the typical folks that are volunteering, and they often are 60 and above or 65 and above, depending upon, what, periodical you believe relative to who is at danger. But there are a lot of folks that may not come back. And you'll need to be thinking about that. So for the library board that I'm on right now, we are wondering if our board book sale volunteers will be coming back. We earn between $8,000 and $9,000 a year from those book sales. So our board is thinking about what we need to do to replace that income in 2021. We are aware of the fact that that may be done for.
Just to reiterate, I had a question. The PowerPoint is in the handout box. The recording of this webinar will automatically be sent to you later this afternoon, so you can watch for that. And if you want to email me at jbarrett@Heritage Ohio asking for any of the resources Lori mentioned, happy to share those. We had another question. Go ahead.
I was going to say, and play the recording back to your board. As you can hear, this was not about board bashing. This is all about alignment. And if there's a misalignment, there'll be a misunderstanding and quite frankly, a waste of everybody's time.
There was another question about 990s. I believe, is the threshold, Lori, still at 20,000 that you don't have to file
25.
25. So the only time you do not file a 990 is when your organization has a budget of less than $25,000.
For assets of less than $25,000.
Assets of less.
Right. Yeah. In other words, do you bring in more than $25,000 every year? And in which case, and I have to say that when we have one client that absolutely, fits that bill. And what we do is that when we fill out applications online for foundations, we just make that notation. We send the P&L, we send the balance sheet, we send the reconciled statement for the last fiscal year, and then we send a notation that, according to the IRS guidelines, we do not have to file, we do not have to have an audit. It's always good to have a CPA on your board, by the way, always good.
Okay, we're waiting for more questions to come in. I guess, Lori, do you have any other anecdotes about COVID that would encourage people? You covered a lot of them already.
I think that it's been really, one thing that I want to let everybody know is that, and I think it's really important to remember this. Oops, let me make my screen full again. One thing that I think is really important for people to remember is that even though your technology may be top notch, remember that the person that's sitting at home looking at your presentation, it may not be top notch. So we just recently did a huge upgrade with our network here at our office. But prior to that time, I watched a couple of fundraisers where it was like the first screening of Godzilla, where the lips were moving and the voices came like 2 minutes to 2 minutes afterwards. It was extremely distracting. So and don't make it too complicated. We're planning on doing actually using Zoom for a prospect cultivation event coming up in November. And one of the things that so God bless their person that's their PR person. We're going to run a slideshow, and then we're going to do a video, and then we're going to do this. And I said, how about if we just try to do an introduction, alternate between speakers, and then throw it up for Q&A and build from there. So please, when you're doing your virtual presentations, unless you have got an ace tech person that is on your staff or on your board or willing to donate their time, crawl before you walk.
That's great advice. Yeah, because I've participated in some things where Zoom meetings for chats, and people didn't have cameras on their computers, so they couldn't participate, and it was awkward, certainly.
Oh yeah, we did a webinar for AFP where my co-presenter, somebody was mowing the lawn outside, her dog was barking, the mailman was ringing the doorbell. I mean, it was like, oh my God, it was just like, it was fine, but we were mortified as presenters, so
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you so much, Lori. Again, Lori's contact information is there. She's very accessible and has supported Heritage Ohio in so many different ways. So I encourage you to take advantage of professional skills when you can.
Absolutely. I also get involved a lot in doing, working with the, if I could say this, Joyce, the Fundraising Effectiveness Project as a volunteer. It's a great opportunity for database analysis. And all you need is 3 data points. You need to have whatever the ID number is of your donor in your database. You need to know the gift amounts, and you need to know the date of gift. So if anybody's interested in a real quickie, database analysis, please contact me. I'd be more, contact me about anything. The rising tide floats all boats. And this is going to be a very difficult time, and I hope that we are all here to tell, I want us all to be here to tell the tale as nonprofit organizations at the end of this. And I just really appreciate the resources that Joyce provides for the community of nonprofits that you all work with, because she does just a fantastic job, and we love Heritage Ohio.
Thank you, Lori. So to let everyone know, this is a quarterly revitalization training on fundraising. We have another program this afternoon, Fundraising for Your Main Street program, which will be held 1 to 2:30 this afternoon. And the presenter will be Mary Helmer, who is the coordinator for the Main Street program in Alabama. So a little bit more traditional Main Street focus. Again, I want to thank Lori. I want to thank the donors of Heritage Ohio who make our webinar possible, and this revitalization training. And if you have any questions, please give me an email, jbarrett@heritageohio.org, or Frances Jo Hamilton, fhamilton@heritageohio.org, and we'll see you later. Thanks so much. Thank you, Lori.
Stay safe, and hope to see you sometime soon, maybe in person, but wearing a mask. Take care, everybody.
Okay. Bye.